Welcome to the Fifth Element Lens. I'm Dene Hager, your host, and this is where we examine the systems that shape our world through a justice-centered, structurally literate lens that is based upon the Fifth Element framework that I developed to analyze companies in a more holistic way. So before we analyze some companies, we critique their choices. We imagine what could be possible. And before we do that, we need to understand this framework I've created that guides this entire series. The Fifth Element framework didn't come from a theory. It came from my lived experience. It came from watching organizations struggle with the same patterns over and over again. And it came from witnessing tactics that looked good on paper, but did nothing to shift power, repair harm, create win-wins, or build sustainable, climate-resilient futures for these companies. This episode is the foundation of all the other episodes. It is the map that you can understand all of the other episodes. It is the lens through which every other episode is understood. So before we begin, we always do a somatic check-in because my work is based in nervous system literacy. And I want you to just take a moment to notice. Just notice. Notice your breath. Is it shallow? Is it deep? Notice your shoulders. Are they tense? Are they in your ears? Should you drop them? So let yourself arrive in this moment, being present in your body. Now let's begin. So I'll tell you about why the Fifth Element framework exists. I built this framework because I saw a pattern across industries, across sectors, across all kinds of teams, across leadership, across my experience. And I've done a lot of things over my life. I got to see a lot of companies that said they were doing, quote, the right things. But I saw that those right things were done in ways that changed nothing. They just looked good to the outside. And maybe to the employees too. But deep down, we all knew we weren't moving the needle. You know, those companies had all kinds of reports. They even had fancy sustainability dashboards. I might have made them for them. And for a while, they even had DEI statements, climate pledges, and maybe even community commitments. Or maybe that was one of their values, community, or authenticity, or respect for the individual. But underneath the surface of that, the work is always shallow, fragmented, rooted strongly in white supremacy, and so performative. Here's often what I saw. Companies that excelled in one area and neglected the rest. And what I mean by that, a company might have strong environmental goals, but no labor protections, or strong governance, but no community reciprocity, no win-wins, or strong philanthropy, but no attempt at relational repair. Their work or their accomplishments or their commitments to be a better company, a better, more just global citizen itself as a corporation, was siloed into specific talking points and therefore ineffective. And there was no understanding of land, labor, or lineage. Most companies have no land acknowledgement, no labor acknowledgement, and no reparative justice lens. Which tells me a lot. There's a lot of reasons why that happens. Maybe they didn't understand the histories that shaped their industries. Maybe they didn't, because they didn't know history, they didn't understand the communities that were impacted by their operations. And maybe because they didn't study their history, they didn't understand the lineage of harm that they inherited and perpetuate. And there's a lot of reasons why people may not know history. I'm not saying it's easy to know what's accurate and true, but it's not impossible. And I noticed companies like to make goals that were too easy. I saw sustainability commitments that were absolutely not requiring any sacrifice or any aspiration at all. I saw DEI goals that were just all talk and really required no power sharing and were often knocked by many of the people in the company. And I saw sustainability goals that required zero operational changes. I saw governance goals that required zero accountability. I saw companies setting goals that they knew they could achieve so that they would never lose face because they didn't make their goal. Not goals that would actually change anything. I saw companies that struggled to imagine aspirational futures. What I see is that most organizations cannot articulate a vision beyond compliance. And they work real hard to make sure that compliance smells so good. And they could not imagine a future beyond just risk mitigation. That's something you have to do anyway. But they could not imagine a world where justice was in their business, not just as an add-on, but as a fundamental design principle. And that's where the fifth element framework was built to solve those gaps. I remember once when a manager turned to me, he said, "Let's make some aspirational goals." And I was in a leadership position, and I could have said, "Let's incorporate justice." But I didn't, because I already knew that that's not the system, not the operating system for that company. Quite the opposite, as a matter of fact. So there was no aspiration. And when I tried to speak aspiration into the air, it was shot down. And that is because their operating system is built on extraction. And justice would run counter to everything they've built. That's why you start with it. That's what the fifth element framework is. The fifth element framework is a justice-centered, structurally literate place to start your approach to business design. It's built on 5 interlocking elements: earth, water, fire, air, and ether, each representing a dimension of organizational behavior that must be aligned for true resilience. Let me be clear, I don't teach compliance for a reason. I teach the ethical higher ground. I once heard from Michelle Obama, when they go low, we go high. This is my way of teaching companies how to go high, of teaching people how to make sure that they are standing up for their beliefs, their values, and themselves. It is a lens, it is a philosophy, it is a structural map for organizations that want to move beyond just being performative and into a meaningful, reparative, climate-aligned way of doing business. Now let's just walk through each element so you can understand them at a high level. Earth is conditions and reality. It is the material world. It is the land, the labor, the supply chain, the full physical footprint, the environmental impact. It asks, what is the real cost of your operations and who bears that cost? What land, labor, and lineage are you accountable to? Earth is where most ESG reports begin and where most of them stop. Water is about relationships and culture. Water is the relationship world. Water is the relational world. It is culture, belonging, trust, and the emotional climate of an organization and the climate it creates around it. So it asks, how do people experience you? How does power flow? Who feels safe and who doesn't? Water reveals the real truth behind the brand. Fire is power and incentives. Fire is the engine. It is incentives, governance, decision-making, and the structures that determine behavior. It's agency. It asks, what does your system reward? What does it punish? Who holds power, and how is it used? Fire is where most companies are avoiding their accountability. And next is air, which is the vision and the narrative. Air is the story. It is the narrative an organization tells about itself, and the narrative it wants others to believe. It asks, what future are you pointing toward? What story are you selling? Does your narrative match the reality? Air reveals the gap between aspiration and action. And then finally, ether, integration and possibility. Ether is the synthesis. It's a place where all the other elements come together and find out if we're living to our fullest values. It asks, what becomes possible when earth, water, fire, and air are aligned? What future could you build if you stopped fragmenting your efforts? What would it look like to design for justice, not just compliance? Aether is the element that most companies never reach because it requires coherence with our values and our actions. Courage to make big changes, bold changes that other companies are too chicken to even think about, and imagination to put together those ideas that companies are too chicken to think about. Why this framework matters is because we're living in a moment where fascism is on the rise. And I could be thrown in jail someday for some of the things I'm going to talk about in the fifth element. I sure hope not. because I'm trying to do something really good for all of humanity and the planet here. This moment is about climate risk. It's accelerating. Labor precarity is increasing. More workers never stand up for their rights. Communities are demanding accountability for environmental injustices, and extractive business models are everywhere, some of them thriving, some collapsing. And ESG is losing credibility fast, has been banned in some areas of my country. And it just doesn't make sense that we are always trying to be aspirational as leaders to make our company do something better, but we never really have an actual framework to judge the company against that covers everything that would make us take the higher moral ground. Companies need a framework that is justice-centered, climate-resilient, structurally literate, historically grounded, and aspirational. The Fifth Element framework is built for just this moment of precarity between what we've done and what we could do. It's built for leaders who want to move beyond compliance. It's built for organizations that really want to live out their values and repair, not just report. It's built for futures that require a lot of courage. The Fifth Element framework is not about perfection. It's about alignment and coherence with our values. It's about designing organizations that refuse extraction and choose justice instead. This framework exists because I saw the limits of commitments. I saw the gaps in corporate accountability. I saw the patterns for the lack of responsibility in corporate responsibility. And I knew we needed something deeper, something beyond compliance, something that honored land, labor, lineage, and the possibility of something better. Take a breath. Let your system settle. And I'll meet you in the next episode. If this episode was interesting to you, you can explore more of my work, including coaching courses and more at the Fifth Element online. So that's www.fifthelement.online.